Good.
And the meeting is being recorded.
Good morning and welcome to the February 18th, 2022 Finance Committee meeting of the State Bar. Just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded. Can I get the board secretary, Louisa, would you please call the roll?
Broughton.
Here.
Delenn.
Here.
Saleg. I see.
Here. I'm here.
Thank you. Sol.
Present.
Tony. You have a quorum.
Very good. Next on the agenda is a call for public comment. Louisa, do we have anybody wishing to make public comment?
I do not see anybody in the attendee pool wishing to make public comment at this moment.
Should I wait just a minute just to be for sure, or should we just try to move ahead?
We only have 3 attendees currently.
And they're all staff. So
Yeah.
I think we're good.
So let's move ahead. There's Mr. Tony. Morning, Mr. Tony.
Purple tie day.
Yeah. I think the next item on the agenda, if there is no public comment, is the chair's report. And I'll just say that I don't really have much to report today. Just wanted to flag for board members that we have 2 very important items that are on our Finance Committee agenda today. One is that we need to approve per legislative statute the annual budget of the State Bar for the year 2022, and then we need to obviously move that along to the full board for passage. And then the second item is an overview item of the board's investment policy, and that we also have to approve that today. I hope that we can get through this pretty expeditiously, and so I'd like to try to get us moving sort of right along. So that concludes my report, unless there are any sort of questions or comments from other board members at this time. Seeing none. I think the next item on the agenda is our consent calendar. And if I am correct in how I am reading our agenda, our consent agenda consists of our minutes from our December meeting. And I would entertain a motion, unless there are some modifications or clarifications to the minutes of this December 16th meeting to move the consent calendar.
So moved.
I second.
It's been moved by Mr. Tony and seconded by Ms. Delenn. Louisa, would you please call the roll?
Broughton.
Yes.
Delenn.
Yes.
Saleg.
Yes.
Tony.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Very good. So moving right along our agenda, the next item is the 2022 State Bar budget that our Chief Financial Officer, Araceli Montoya Chico, will present.
Yes, good morning, Finance Committee members. So I will be presenting my screen to share my presentation. So let me know once you see it. Wait. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So great. So today I'm going to be discussing our 2022 final budget. Give you a budget overview. So as you're all aware, the Board of Trustees was not able to finalize their strategic plan for the next 5 years at the January board meeting. So there could be a possibility that we may need to modify the budget once the strategic plan is finalized. However, we have incorporated into our 2022 budget the strategic initiatives that Leah did highlight in her presentation at the January board meeting. And these will circle around transparency and accountability, modernization, consumer protection, and regulation and enforcement. Some of those key strategic initiatives that we did focus on our budget are listed here. One being the investment in technology to support our migration from our legacy systems, and to allow us to change more of our manual processes into automated processes. Also included in our budget is seed funding for the Client Trust Account Protection Program, which will require attorneys to report annually if they are responsible for client trust accounts. Another strategic initiative that we've accounted for in the budget is funding to establish a new Office of Consumer Advocate. This office will be tasked with acting as an independent and confidential resource to ensure that complaints about the State Bar staff or the State Bar actions do receive full and impartial review. And also we have significant funding in new positions for our Office of Chief Trial Counsel. The Office of Chief Trial Counsel, OCTC, received 10 new positions, and it's the office that received the most significant increase in terms of positions. And that will help us increase capacity to conduct complex investigations and also support more timely processing of cases excuse me, arising from criminal investigations. Now here for you is a summary of our bar-wide budget, revenues and expenses. And as you can see, our 2022 revenues and expenses are both increasing from our prior year budget as well as our prior year actuals. In terms of the primary drivers for the increase in revenue, this is really due to our grants. We're getting the new Homeless Prevention 3 grant in 2022, as well as larger equal access and partnership grants. And these will total about $60 million. Now, outside of grants that are driving the revenue increase, there's a couple of other highlights that I want to bring to your attention. In terms of bar exam fees, those are actually projected to decline as we're expecting a lower number of test takers, as well as the refunds that we will need to issue in connection with the technology issues experienced in the July 2021 bar exam. You will also see lower investment earnings, investment revenue in our budget. And that's really because in 2021, our interest rates were too high compared to actuals earned. So we've brought down our 2022 budget rates to align closer to what our 2021 actuals were, and thus decreasing our investment revenues. Now, in terms of expenses, again, similar to revenue, the largest driver of expenses is our grant expenditures for those 3 grants that I've mentioned, Homeless Prevention 3, Equal Access, and Partnerships. Outside of the higher grant expenditures, there's 2 main drivers of the increase in expenses. One being service expenses, and that's really due mainly to IT services and Office of Admission Services. Now for admissions, the increase in service expenses is the agreement that they've entered into to outsource the in-person bar exam. You will also see a higher debt-related expense of about $2.6 million. And this is because in the current year, we're now budgeting both the principal and interest. And that was done really to better align the use of working capital. Now here, this slide is an overview of all of our fund balances. You will see all the budgeted revenues and all the budgeted expenses for each of the funds. And you will see the reserve levels of the funds that are in a deficit position and are falling below our floor of 17%. So in the upcoming slides, I'm going to cover those 3 funds, being the general fund, the admissions fund, and the elimination of bias funds, as those are the 3 funds that have a deficit position. So I will go into more detail in those 3 funds. Now to start off, here's the detail of our 2022 general fund budget. You see all of the revenue and expense categories. And for 2022, you do see that we are budgeting a deficit close to $4 million. For the end of the year, our projected reserves will be around $14 million, which is roughly 15% of 15% reserve level, which is just below the 17% floor per the policy. Now that is increasing from our 2021 budget, which was also a deficit. But I will note that for 2021 actuals, that is projected to result in a surplus. And that's really mainly driven by our personnel changes. We have personnel savings that were primarily driven by higher vacancy rates, than we had budgeted. And in terms of the general fund revenues, they're projected to decrease slightly, about $100,000 from our 2021 budget. And they're a little bit higher from our 2021 estimated actuals. Now, in terms of the decrease, that's really driven by two things. One is reduced investment earnings, as I previously discussed, and that was offset by slightly higher tenant lease revenue as more of our tenants are starting to come back into the office. On the expense side for the general fund, our expenses are projected to increase both from actuals and projected 2021 numbers. And there's two main factors contributing to the increase in the general fund expenses. The first one being the debt-related increase that I have mentioned. That'll be about 2.8 million, and that's because we're now budgeting both the principal and interest, whereas in prior year we were only budgeting the interest portion. And again, this change was done to better illustrate the use of working capital and to really minimize the discrepancies that we get when we do our budget versus actual reporting in our quarterly financials. So we expect that to decrease. And the second factor is our increase for services, and this is primarily driven by IT expenditures, which we are making the investment in 2022 in IT. This excess of expenses over revenues is resulting in roughly that $4 million planned use of 2022 reserves in 2022, I should say. Next is admissions. Again, this is the detail of the admissions revenue and expense categories. And as you can see, admissions does have a significant deficit, close to $9 million in 2022, which is up from the 2021 budget deficit we had, and significantly higher than the actuals in 2021, which resulted in a surplus. Now, in terms of admission revenues, the decrease is primarily due to the projected decline in our number of test takers and the refunds that we will be issuing for the July bar exam issues we had. On the expense side, there's a net increase of roughly 700,000, and that's really driven by an increase in service expenses that is being offset by a decrease in exam-related expenses. Now, that increase and that decrease in those two expense categories is really all related to that service agreement that will outsource the in-person bar exam for site procurement and proctoring services. Now, the $8.8 million deficit that admissions has in 22 can be partially absorbed by the fund's balance. And I will call to your attention that in 2020 and 2022, our budgets did reflect deficits. However, actual surpluses were realized in both of the years. So it's not unreasonable to assume that our 2022 actual deficit could be less than the $8.8 million. Now, on a long-term basis, the deficit is not sustainable. We do know that there is an issue with admissions. Really, out of the $8.8 million deficit, only a portion of it is a one-time occurrence. But other than that, there is a long-term deficit that we are projecting for admissions. So right now, we're currently doing an analysis to identify the causes of the deficit, as well as identify possible mitigating measures to help us bridge that deficit. And we expect to have the analysis completed and presented by the May Board of Trustees meeting. The next fund, the Elimination of Bias Fund, as you can see, it's also projected to be in a deficit position, roughly close to $500,000. And that's also increasing from our 2021 budget and 2021 actuals. And now for this portion, I will pass it on really briefly to Leah to discuss some history and information on the Elimination of Bias Fund.
Yeah, I thought I'd take this slide just because it'll take us back quite a few years here. So just to explain this fund, the fund was originally established as a way of supporting the bar's work for both bar relations and elimination of bias or diversity work via voluntary donations from licensees. And this was at a time when we perceived our ability to spend licensee money on these types of activities as being very restricted. So we used to receive $5 per licensee as an opt-out fee to fund the combined work of bar relations, so relationships with local bar associations, and elimination of bias. When the state bar section separated from the bar, that $5 opt-out fee was reduced to $2. So our funding stream for this work obviously significantly reduced. And we have seen kind of a consistent revenue decline since that time. However, at the same time, our work in the DEI space has only increased. And this has in part been driven by our statutory mission that went into effect at the same time as the separation of the state bar sections, which says that part of our charge is to advance diversity in the profession. So we lost some of our funding and our charge only increased. Part of the way you can see that increase in our responsibilities in this area manifest is we're now required to report to the legislature every 2 years on our work to diversify the profession. We have adopted internally an approach that I like to call built in, not bolted on. So our diversity work is not just housed in one committee, COAP, but instead many areas of the bar, all areas of the bar are tasked with identifying how our work impacts the diversity of the profession. And one very visible way you've seen this as board members is in our study that we've done on racial disparities in the discipline system. So our funding has gone down and our workload has increased in this area. That's the bottom line here. So our revenue stream is insufficient to support the work. In the last legislative report we submitted, which was just last year, we identified an ongoing funding need in excess of $400,000 beyond what we receive in funding. That didn't go anywhere. So we're not getting an extra $400,000 at this time. But we've also had OGC sort of new thinking, or I think maybe more modern thinking on our ability to use the licensee fees to fund elimination of bias, diversity and inclusion work. And so our analysis at this time, it would suggest that we're not so restricted that we can't use our general fund money to support the work. So I say this all to say, this is a structural deficit. I don't know how it's going to be fixed, but we are able to continue ahead using general fund money to support elimination of bias activities. And I'll turn it back to you, Araceli.
Thank you, Leah. Okay, so back to you've seen this slide earlier in my presentation, and I'm presenting it here again to show the overall projection of all of our funds. As you can see, the ones below are 17% floor. I've discussed that being the general fund, the admissions fund, and the elimination of bias funds. Those funds that have NA here, these are all the grant related funds, and these are excluded from the minimum reserve target policy. All of the funds that are in excess of the ceiling, which is 30%, all of those will need a spend down plan. And that will, our plan is to bring, present to the board at the May board meeting, the spend down plan for all of the funds that do have excess funds. Now here's the summary of our board reserve policy. All funds outside of the grant related funds need to be between 17 and 30%. Again, all those funds that have reserves greater than 30% for 6 consecutive months do require a spend down plan. And the policy also has conditions where it is appropriate for reserves to fall below the target minimum under certain circumstances. And these are highlighted here. One being one-time uses for investments in either human resources technology or other improvements that could strengthen the state bar's revenues and reduce future costs. Another being unexpected expenditures or revenue shortfalls. And the last is multi-year forecasts showing ongoing structural gaps. Now, in terms of the exceptions, if you will, or one of the conditions where we're allowed to go below the reserve levels, we believe that the one-time need for investments in technology applies to our general fund deficit that we currently have. Recall that the general fund deficit is primarily driven by two items, one being the one-time investments in IT services and equipment. This will help us facilitate the transition from manual to more automated processes, thus reducing on a long-term basis our costs. And the second portion is the debt-related revision we did, which we anticipate that when we sell our buildings in our San Francisco building in 2022, much of our outstanding debt will be eliminated. So this aspect of the deficit will also be limited in nature. And thus, the general fund deficit satisfies this policy condition where we can go below the minimum reserves. Now, in terms of the elimination of bias fund, their projected reserve of 5.6%, we don't believe is supported by any of the minimum reserve exceptions. As Leah discussed, any future activities of the fund will need to be funded from the general fund. And similarly for admissions, their projected reserve balance is around 14%. And we also don't believe it's supported by any of the minimum reserve target exceptions. So that is why right now we are doing the analysis that I mentioned to identify what are the costs of deficits and potential mitigating measures underway. Now that is the conclusion of my presentation. So I can open up the floor for any questions and have Luisa put up the resolution.
Questions from board members? Mr. Tony?
Thank you very much. I think this was a terrific presentation. I particularly appreciated not only comparing the 2022 budget that we're being asked to vote on, not only comparing that to the 2021 budget that was adopted a year ago, but also comparing it to the 2021 projections of actual, because both of those give us important information as we take a look at the 2022 budget. One of the things that I note is on the, and that I appreciate is that when we went into the deep dive, looking at the general account, looking at admissions, and looking at elimination of bias, those three areas. And it was appropriate to focus on those three areas because they were the three areas in which a deficit was reflected for those funds. In each of the cases, in your description, both the numerical finances, the numbers, and also the very clear text description on the slide after each of them, it said that the shortfalls will be made up by, in the general account, it said planned reserves. In admission, it said fund balance. It's the same thing, it's that there are reserves, and also elimination of bias indicates a much smaller number. And I thought that was really good. What I'd like to see is that same information reflected on the overall budget that we are adopting. I come from a school of thought where I believe that one should never approve a budget that shows a deficit. I don't think that's responsible. I would like to be able, the solution is already in the proposal that was presented to us, and that is simply to reflect that the 15, whatever the number is, the $1 million, 13, whatever the number is, it's close to that, is offset in the revenue side by fund balance. We actually have that information in front of us, that is the plan. I'd like to simply be reflected in the budget so that it's transparent. You don't just find that out by going through all the details, but it's up front. And the good news is that if this were done last year, we never would have had to go into the fund balance, because even though there was a unbalanced budget approved last year, there was actually a surplus. So we can evaluate at mid-year, do we still need to keep this in, or can we take it out? But I think from the beginning, I did complain about this last year. This isn't the first time. And I agreed because I was new and because we were in transition for the the chief financial officer. We still had an interim one at the time. I agreed to let it go. But this time, this is something that I think is important. And so I would like to see, I'd really like to see simply the fund balance that we are planning to draw upon to meet the gap reflected in the big budget numbers. That's all.
Okay. I think that's a modification we can make. We will need to change the resolution slightly. Louisa, I think then we want to put in the language here that we discussed around giving us the authority to make technical adjustments and other edits prior to, you don't need to screen share it right now. Just that language that we discussed this morning, so that we can make that change, Mark.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think Araceli and I can take a look at where it would be best to sort of be very transparent about that in the budget.
And just so I'm clear, Mr. Tony, you'd like to see that reflected in today's resolution, and not the resolution that potentially we would take up at the full board next week?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, all it requires is on the revenue
Sure.
side to add one single line item that says either fund balance or reserves. I don't care about the labeling. I'll defer to the labeling to Araceli, but to just recognize what it is that she presented to us. I'm not asking for there to be a change or a modification. I'm only asking for a clarification for transparency's sake. That's all I'm asking for.
Understood. Understood. And Araceli and Leah, we're good to do that.
Yeah, I think what I've asked Louisa to do is modify the resolution. We were discussing this morning the fact that in previous years, the resolutions related to the budget have given staff the ability to make technical adjustments up until the date of submission. So rather than specifying this particular change, I think we'll have that authority in the resolution, and Araceli and I know what we need to do. So we will make sure that that gets addressed.
You good, Mr. Tony?
I'm definitely fine with that, and as long as it is reflected in what the board sees and votes upon, I'm fine with that, and I'm certainly fine with with that understanding. I don't know. Does that mean, Leah, that we need to change the wording on this particular motion, or we don't need to? And the understanding is that
Louisa is probably
okay.
editing it now, and when you guys are ready, we can put it up.
Right. Like to, Mr. Tony, you have additional questions or comments?
That was it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Other members of the committee, questions, comments? Please, Sonia.
Leah, I have a quick question on the proposed sale of the building. I know that will take care of the debt service. If there's excess, and hopefully there will be excess amount, how would that affect the budget?
Well,
or impact the budget?
we're talking quite a bit right now with our legislative stakeholders in particular about how the proceeds, the net proceeds from the sale of the building can be used. We do need to have approval for the use of those proceeds. So at this juncture, obviously it's going to pay off any outstanding debts on the building. But beyond that, and number one, we have to find a new home, right? We have to pay for that. And then the remaining excess money that we realize, could be used for a variety of different things. And we've begun to float some ideas that we think reflect potentially shared interests of with the legislature and the bar. But it's only just the beginning of a conversation, and the board will ultimately have to approve any kind of proposal that we formally put forward. And then again, the legislature will have to approve same. So we're a long way from knowing exactly how it's going to impact our budget.
Thank you.
Other questions from committee members? Leah and Araceli, I have two sort of quick questions. My first one is that there are a number of funds that are here. And you know, doing some of the board trainings for and sort of the finance training, I noted that there appear to be some areas of overlap in terms of what specific funds can be used for. And so I'm presuming that those funds were established in statute, but is it appropriate for us to also sort of look at and make recommendations as to whether or not we need to have as many funds as we have here?
Do you want to answer that, or are you referring mostly, Arnie, to all the grant funds, the various iterations of grant
No,
funds?
I was looking. I mean, we haven't, and I can't tell you which ones exactly. And trying to remember which ones I feel like there are areas of overlap. But you know, if you look at the Equal Access Fund, and you look at the Justice Gap Fund, and you look at the, you know, some of the other funds. I mean, Araceli, you might be able to put it back up on screen. I just noted that I thought that either in their titling or in their mission, there were some areas of overlap. And I don't know if they are really, really distinct, but it seemed to me that there were some areas of overlap. And I'm just wondering, is that something that that we can review and make some determinations about whether or not we can collapse some of these funds?
Sure. When I said grant funds, that's what I was referring to. Because all of those funds, in essence, house monies that are distributed to legal services organizations. So
Okay.
bank settlement does, Equal Access does, grants does, and Justice Gap does. All of those, and the Legal Services Trust Fund. So those are all housing money that we distribute out. Some of it on a statutory formula basis, some of it through RFP. But we can take a look at it, Arnie, certainly.
Okay. And I think I can ask this question, but my second question, I appreciate that. And I think I can ask this question, which is, Araceli, you referred to the deficit in the admissions fund and the fact that actuals may be lower, the deficit may lower. And I'm going to presume that some of that may be subject to the negotiations that we're currently having with the exam administrator. Is that correct? Or are there other factors that may be involved there?
Sorry, to bring the deficit down in 2022?
Yes.
In admissions.
Yeah.
I'll jump in and say, I don't think we should be talking about that in open
Okay.
session. Yes,
Okay.
that's part of it.
Very good.
But other factors, Arnie, are simply vacancy rates. The vendor that we have hired to do the outsource of the in-person examination, the in-person exams, has sort of promised, we have a meeting after this February administration to identify options for efficiencies in the administration of the exam. If that bears fruit, that should bring costs down. So there are a number of different factors.
Very good. Very good. Mr. Broughton, I see your hand.
Sorry, had to unmute myself. I'm not sure I should ask this question or if this is the appropriate question to ask. But when I look, since I am a legal specialist, I look at the legal specialization chart there and I noticed that the reserve level was 315.2%. And I'm wondering if that reflects that perhaps we need to look at the fees that we're charging for the legal specializations, or if that's if there's some other explanation as to why that reserve level is so high. And the other thing is that client security fund is also a high level, but I know that we spend a lot of money every year on that, and we're always short. So perhaps we can address those two things, or at least somebody can explain that to me.
So on the client security fund, I will say, that so the client security fund actually is part of the reserve policy level. We have to exclude application payouts, so that is bringing the percent to be a lot higher. We do have a significant number of application payouts budgeted for 2022, though. I think close to $8.5 million that we anticipate paying out. So with those budgeted application payouts, we anticipate that the client security fund reserve level will come down closer to the 30% ceiling. If that doesn't happen, then we will need to come up with the spend down plan of the excess funds. But we do have close to $9 million in budgeted payouts that will bring down the client security fund balance lower.
On the legal spec, so I think, Mark, the simplest answer is everywhere where you see a fund balance in excess of 30%, and it's not an excluded fund, right? We have to come back with a spend down plan. So that'll be client security, that will be legal spec. On legal spec, you may recall several years ago, we were in this situation and there was a fee holiday for legal specialists. And I'm sure you had to recuse yourself from voting on that. So yes, I do think, given that this situation has now manifested again a second time where there's this really high fund balance, probably the program needs to look not just at fee holidays, but also at restructuring its fee structure. And when Araceli mentioned that as part of our work to figure out what's going on in admissions, we are revisiting or reviewing all of the fees in admissions. Legal spec is one of them. So that may be one that comes down. Others are going to need to come up, but that may be one that needs to drop.
I don't see any other hands. Any other members of the committee have questions? Luisa, are you prepared to show the new resolution?
Yes. Can you see my screen okay?
We can.
Yes.
Can you highlight maybe in red, Luisa, the change from the what's in the agenda item?
Mr. Tony, you satisfied?
This looks great. Thank you very much.
May I have a motion then, please?
I'll be happy to make the motion.
I'll second it.
So moved by Mr. Tony, seconded by Mr. Broughton. Luisa, would you please call the roll to approve the 2022 State Bar budget and pass it on to the full board?
Broughton,
Yes,
Delan,
Yes.
Salag, and Tony.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Very good. Thank you for that, members. And I think we just have one other item for us, and that's the review of the investment policy. And
Yes,
you ready? You ready?
I'm ready. Let me share my screen once more. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So now we'll be going briefly over our annual review of the investment policy. The board book does call for the finance committee to review our investment policy on an annual basis. And our investment policy does outline what our objectives are, what our authorized investments are, and our responsibilities. The last policy, or the current policy, was last adopted in November of 2020. Our policy does align with the state of California. We follow the state of California's investment policy, which gives us what are the authorized investments that we are allowed to purchase and hold. For this agenda item, I am not proposing any changes to the policy, and it will stay as is. So if there's no further questions or any questions, we can move to the resolution. No questions.
I don't see any hands for questions related to the investment policy.
Okay, let me stop sharing. And Luisa can put up the resolution for our investment policy review. Luisa, are you? Okay.
Araceli, I would note from the prior budget discussion,
Yes,
our yields have been not as great as we had hoped for.
that is, that is, yes, that's true. It's very accurate.
But some of that is a result of just some of the restrictions that we have that are a part of the investment policy that are statutory restrictions in terms of where we can invest our money, correct?
Yes, the policy is rather conservative. So we are, allowed to invest in pretty low risk, conservative investments, and those are the ones that tend to yield the lowest returns. So, the more aggressive, riskier returns that could yield higher results are pretty much excluded from the current policy. So we do have a somewhat diversified portfolio of investments, but again, we're limited by very conservative investments.
Very good. If members have had a chance, if there are no other questions, if members have had a chance to review the resolution, I would entertain a motion.
I move.
Second,
Moved by Ms. Dellin and seconded by Mr. Broughton. Lisa, would you please call the roll?
Broughton,
yes.
Glenn,
Yes.
Stalag,
Yes.
thank you. And Tony.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Very good. Thank you for that. Members, I think that concludes our business for today.
Okay.
All right.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
We stand adjourned.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.